numerous times and ascribe to me all sorts of things which are simply not true and in some cases just ludicrous. I think your video, as sarcastic and as much as it is a emotive projection of irrationality, merits a response. Now, like I said, you're kind of all over the map here. You have your little interspersals of sarcasm and what have you, but I'll try to focus on the main points. Now, I would not arrogate to myself the role of doctor in a medical clinical sense or a psychological sense. I made the comment to you in an effort to help you. Your interpretation and reaction to it flowed from a natural cause and effect sequence, and it's understandable, at least in part. But I think there's a lot of confusion and a lot of misunderstanding flying about in this video. It's repetitive misunderstanding. And I think a lot of people, and this might be a good opportunity, in fact, to bring up certain points. A lot of people have forgotten basic stuff. Now, I actually am kind of on break from the manosphere, an indefinite break maybe. I've seen a lot of things in the manosphere in the last few months that I don't like. I don't like the direction things are going in, and that's a topic to address at a later date, if at all. But it seems that many of us perhaps have forgotten basic 101 principles or basic stuff that had been talked about many winters ago. It might be a good time to bring that up again. Maybe that will be helpful. So I will do my best to ignore your sarcasm, your cackling laughter, and other things. I will, however, comment that it's a damn bloody shame that you moved from the very fine state of Wisconsin to the Stygian arid wasteland we know as Arizona. But I guess that's your preference. And in this, I will grant you it. I prefer the cold weather, particularly cool, rainy weather. I'm a great fan of British weather. Literally, when I was living in London, people used to ask me what my favorite thing about the city was. I always said the weather, and I wasn't kidding. But anyway, I digress, and I go off on my own tangent here. So I'm not going to try to address these things sequentially because I don't really see much sequence in your video. But let me first clarify. This idea that I don't like women, I'm not sure whether you are ascribing homosexuality to me. If I were homosexual, I would concede it. I happen not to be. I am, in a physiological, biological sense, a heterosexual male. Not liking women, I'm not sure what that means. Am I sexually attracted to women? Yes. Do I act upon these urges? No. If that constitutes not liking women, then I guess I don't like women. That's not very well defined. You should have defined that better. Moving on. You spend a lot of time talking about the naturalness, if you will, of your desire for women, your emotional attraction to women, physical attraction to women, and your spiritual attraction to women. And I don't like using that word either. I am an atheist, but we'll just use it because it finds its place in human discourse every now and then, and it describes something useful, something perhaps otherworldly. Yeah, and this actually is quite disturbing, and this is something that could be talked about. Your three-tiered attraction to women, and it's completely natural. Well, let's talk about what's natural. Basically, everything is natural. We live in a naturalistic world. Processes come about through natural interactions and reactions, cause and effect. So, for example, let's talk about something that is very natural. Let's talk about smoking as a habit and nicotine addiction. Now, this is a natural process. When you start smoking cigarettes repetitively, constantly, nicotine is an addictive chemical. So you take the properties within the cigarette, specifically nicotine, and you take the properties within the human body, the physiology, the neurology, and you get a chemical reaction arising from an interaction, a natural process that results in an unhealthy addiction. So when we talk about natural, we have to really define what that actually means, what that actually is. There's a serious problem in our society. In virtually every language I'm familiar with, we talk about natural this, naturel, natürlich. Everything is natural, and that means good. It can be good, but it doesn't have to be. Every process that occurs around us is natural. We live in a physical system. The universe is a physical system. Our bodies are a physical system. This mic that I'm using was constructed using, I'm not a metallurgist, but so I'm not going to comment on the details, but obviously there was manufacturing of plastic was involved, metal, the circuitry, the wiring. These all arose from natural processes on so many different planes. The level of understanding that needs to occur in the human brain to construct such a device, the actual interaction between chemicals to create plastic and the different metals, the movements of presumably a person's wrist in putting the screws in to make sure that things are held in place. And I mean, everything is natural. So using the term natural as a synonym for good or positive is a misnomer. It's inaccurate, and we need to be a lot more specific in the language we use in our diction. Diction is extremely important. I am a bit of a fanatic in this regard, but I think it's important. So, natural is not necessarily positive. It can be anything, because everything is natural. And you yourself being an atheist, unless you subscribe to some exception there, the supernatural, you will agree that everything is natural. And I know what you meant. I know what you intended by saying natural. You wish to talk about natural as a synonym for the positive. Now, there's another perspective on this. Your physical, mental, emotional, and indeed spiritual attraction to women is, of course, positive in the sense that it will aid you, or aid men in general, assuming that most men share this, and I do believe most heterosexual men do. This desire, it will aid you in the fertilization of gametes. After all, that is why all that attraction is there. Now, I don't want to go too much into evolutionary history. This is an off-the-cuff video. But life, as we know it, came about roughly 3.6 billion years ago. The first life forms were prokaryotes. Those are organisms with no nuclear membrane. It took another roughly 2.6 billion years for multicellular life, and we don't really get to mammals until about 200 million years ago, and modern humans, give or take 200,000 or 100,000 years ago. Now, even if we go all the way back to prokaryotes, or just multicellular life, just a mere billion years ago, all of these organisms were engaging in two activities. There were minor activities in between them, but the two major activities were survival and reproduction. Obviously, prokaryotes as well, mammals and everything in between, lizards, birds, reptiles, so on, arthropods, all this stuff. Yes, arthropods were some of the earliest multicellular life. Survival, reproduction. Now, we come to modern humans, and all kinds of strange assumptions are made because we are, relatively speaking, cognitively adept. We are skillful thinkers, at least compared to most other life forms on the planet. We have these strange recursive thoughts, and we have the ability to use language, hence why we are communicating. And so a smokescreen is erected around us, and we start to forget the chain of life. We start to forget where it all comes from. Now, in the strictest biological, in a cosmological sense, we have no purpose. We are purposeless. The universe is piteously without purpose, and we are a physical system within that physical system. We are without purpose. In a biological sense, we exist for the same reasons: survival and reproduction. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a personal purpose. You might want to dedicate your life to eating pizza, playing Final Fantasy, or living in the Stygian arid wasteland we call Arizona. which is still better than California. But nevertheless, that is a purpose. And yes, I was being sarcastic. I had to slip that in, just touche, a little fancy in there. You can design whatever purpose you want for yourself. The point is, on a biological scale, in the biosphere, our purpose is survival and reproduction, objectively speaking. The reason why you feel physically, emotionally, and spiritually attracted to women is because you are a biological organism, a physical organism that desires to fertilize gametes, reproduce, get your DNA out there. That's what you're there to do. That's what we're all here to do, in theory. And that's natural. Of course it's natural. Yeah. But the point is, the main point I'm trying to make here is that simply because something is natural, as I said, this should not be conflated with positive necessarily. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't mean that something that is natural does not carry with it certain risks or negatives. Once again, let's go back to the cigarette addiction. Natural chemical interactions there that bring about arising from the chemical properties of a cigarette and the human body, and you get an addiction, which may or may not afflict each and every person. I was able to quit cold turkey cigarettes years ago and never went back. Other people struggle with that. That's another issue and another topic for another time. It's perfectly natural with someone with a genetic proclivity towards alcoholism to indulge in alcoholism and enjoy it, at least for a short while, and suffer for it later. It's also natural for someone with a physiological addiction to heroin to engage in that, get their high, feel great, and then drop 10,000 meters, metaphorically speaking, afterwards. All very natural. This is all natural. Now, the point I'm trying to make here is just because one is emotionally, physically, and spiritually attracted to women doesn't mean that there are not negative consequences to it. And I like the game you're playing, Sir Mickey of Shrugged. It's very interesting. You seem to describe the problems men face solely and strictly within a legal context. Everything is legal or cultural, lest we forget that we stem from a line of life harking back 3.6 billion years, all of which, up until very recently, maybe 70,000 years ago, none of this had culture. There was no culture, there was no legal system. It was all just survival and reproduction. Eat or be eaten. Fuck, reproduce, die, move, and so on. You are making a classic error here, as do many people, in ignoring that. You are thriving off of your autopilot function here. You are getting off on. You're letting your autopilot function lead you, not only in your desires, but also in your thoughts and your expression here. It is the legal problems for men exist and are pernicious and are dangerous, but they exist because we have a culture which itself is informed by the unflinching hand of 3.6 years of biology, 3.6 billion years of biology. Everything we have here exists within the context of a biological legacy that we all can say we could either suffer from or are products of or even have profited from. I think all of those descriptors are accurate. So you cannot create a description of the problems of men in a context void of the biological, of the physical system that we are within the greater physical system of Earth, and its interaction with other organisms and the greater physical system of the universe, the cosmos. It's not possible. It simply cannot be. And it's not because I'm declaring this by fiat. It's simply look at the timeline. Now, if you do the calculations, and this is something I actually know off the top of my head because this interests me, if we are generous and give modern humans about culture in the form we talk about it, culture is a difficult thing to define, but there were cave paintings discovered in South Africa dating back to about 70,000 years, art, and art is often perceived as synonymous with culture. It certainly doesn't exist in any other life form. on the Earth that we know of. So 70,000 years. The prokaryotes I spoke of, they came about 3.6 billion years ago. In terms of percentages, let me tell you how long culture has been around. It's been around 0.00194% of the time. That's not a lot. Life has been around a whole lot longer. A whole lot longer. Let me repeat that, 0.00194%. That's not a lot. So the idea that this is a cultural problem or a legal problem is true, but it's not possible to talk about this without the biological origins. We have a biological predilection to favor women over men. This has been talked about. The gods only know how often. In many contexts, in many social, save those contexts in which there's acute danger, and then we put the men in. But we want to protect women. Women are the limiting factor in reproduction. I mean, this is all 101 stuff. And to be honest, this is kind of the stuff I've gotten tired of talking about, and I see the manosphere has grown increasingly enmeshed and trapped within a perpetual 101 freshman course. But regardless, you cannot escape that. Now that we've established that, I don't know what counter evidence you could produce, since, like I said, 0.00194% of the time we've had culture of the entire existence of biological life forms, bios, Greek, life. So you exist to fertilize gametes, to reproduce. Whether you do so or not is irrelevant. And it is foolish to think that just because something is, once again, natural, that there are no harmful consequences from this. Now you talk, and it's interesting, you talk about the legal consequences of things, the legal problems that arise, the cultural issues that we face. I have a mutilated penis too. But you seem to forget that you don't even need the legal stuff, for example, to suffer great harm within the context of what you describe your emotional, physical, and indeed spiritual attraction to female Homo sapiens. I can think of, right off the top of my head, 11 examples, and if I thought a little harder and longer, maybe some others, of men who are not in a legal situation with women per se, but nonetheless suffered immensely. And this is, if you want to use it as a metaphor, as a symbol, or whatever, this is kind of a manifestation of this thing we call male mother need, essentially. This overwhelming desire to service the female, to be with the female, to exist for the female. When I listen to you speak, that's the kind of discourse I'm hearing. Now, I have a friend who unfortunately dwells in the Stygian depths of California, a very young, but also very intelligent man, who lost an entire year of his life because of the emotional fallout resulting from his ex-wife. And yes, once again, ex-wife, girlfriend, yes. At university. Now, I mentioned he's very intelligent. He is. And after his freshman year, which he completely bombed, basically failed almost everything, or very D's, consistent D's, very poor performance. He got basically straight A's, fantastic student. It took him 2 years to recover from the emotional and, dare I say, biochemical fallout from that relationship. And in that year that he lost, he could have accomplished wonders. He could have become a physicist. He could have done. So now what he has to do is spend extra time making up for that loss. Now, he got off relatively safely, I'd say. I know another example of an acquaintance of mine years back. He was not married. He was just married in Stardust language. He was just a normal guy. He couldn't deal with the loss. He drove his car into a tree. By some miracle of the gods, he survived. I know another guy who got fired from his job, was not able to complete his university studies, and lost most of his money because of the catatonic state he was, and so on and so forth. We can we can talk about natural all we want, but when I've in the past warned men about the dangers of relationships, I wasn't explicitly talking about the legal stuff. And I know that's what MRAs do, and the anti-feminists and all these people that call themselves this. That's fine, but we need to be acutely aware that there are dangers that go far beyond the legal or the cultural, as you put it. We are biologically, for lack of a better word, preordained to want to be of service to women. We wish to service their needs. The same friend of mine who lost an entire year. Recently, he was telling me about an episode he had with his teaching assistant, and an attractive female, it seems. She dropped her papers, and he instantly fell to the ground, picked them up, and with a smile returned them to her, upon which she then replied, "How cute." I asked him, after he told me this, would you have done the same for a man? And he was unsure. This is the reflex. This is the autopilot function that you seem to enjoy indulging in. It feels good to indulge in the autopilot function because, well, that's what we're sort of preordained to do. It's difficult and complicated and indeed sometimes painful to live a life and to run counter to the automaticity of your body and your mind, to the autopilot function. It's difficult. It's hard. That's why most human beings, and this has very little now to do with MGTOW per se, fail at that. We love our autopilot. That's what we've been doing for, if we look at our ancestors in the form of prokaryotes, 3.6 billion years. So the idea that all this is natural and this and that, and it's all great, there are real acute dangers. Now, you as an individual might be immune to the kind of biochemical emotional fallout that results from the destruction of a relationship when a woman chooses to end that relationship. You might have a greater immunity to kryptonite, as I once called it, than some people. There are degrees of this, no doubt. But nonetheless, men, you exist to serve women. You exist not only to serve women, because society deems it so, because the legal system deems it so, because your biology deems it so. It is a reflex. Now, mind you, this same friend, the self-same friend I mentioned, like I say, he's very intelligent. He's very perspicacious, and yet he still fell to his knees and picked these papers up for this attractive female TA, and in all likelihood would not have done the same for a male TA. You see, I even have to condition myself. When I go out of my way to do unto men as I do unto women, I hold the door for men. I pick things up if they drop them. I try to help them out in my daily life. Complete strangers, mind you, but I try to keep that as a rule, and it is a conscious effort, I tell you, because it runs counter to our biology. Men don't need help. We don't want to help women. We want to help women. We don't want to help men. We want to help women. That's how it works. So, once again, addiction, and it is an addiction, there's no other way to describe it. An addiction is something that you can't really refuse. It's just endemic to your very being. You can see it in alcohol addiction, drug addiction, cigarette addiction. You can see it on any number of levels. And anything carried forth or carried out in excess is going to is almost per force have serious consequences. I mean, it might be nice to enjoy a cigar every now and then, but, chain smoking cigars probably isn't the best idea if you don't want lip and mouth cancer. There are just so many things out there that in excess can be bad. And here's the problem, Sir Mickeyshrugged. Here's the problem. The problem is that male-mother need, this addiction we have, or we'll just call it attraction we have for females, it is by its very nature addictive. We will immolate ourselves very easily and very voluntarily and without second thought for the sake of women, and it takes a almost Herculean effort to countermand that instinct. And moreover, to countermand it on a consistent basis, that requires a cognitive renaissance, a cognitive revolution within your own mind. That requires the turning off of the autopilot, which very few people succeed at large, and specifically even MGTOWs, very few MGTOWs succeed at. I do briefly want to talk about these divisions of MGTOW. I think there are different kinds of MGTOW. I don't think this, and I don't want to talk too much about it, but I don't think this gentleman's description was entirely accurate. Undoubtedly, people go their own way for different reasons. You not calling me MGTOW is somewhat laughable. It's not because, I mean, like I said, I am attracted to women too. I don't see them as a spiritual savior, which you seem to see them as, but I do try to see things in a more rational light. Admittedly, you might not like what I'm saying, but I don't think you're being particularly rational. The entirety of your response was emotive, and it was emotive projection. You talk about pizza, Final Fantasy. I actually never played Final Fantasy. I know it's a good game, but I'll probably never, that series, I'll never get into it. But I try in my videos to talk about rational perspectives and rational solutions to problems that are so deep-seated in us that any emotional response to them is likely to backfire or at least have partially disastrous consequences. It's not just the legal system, it's not just the culture, because all of these are informed by the unrelenting forces of biology which got us here in the first place. It is the very real danger of the fact that we exist to serve women. We even believe this on a subconscious level. We do things for women we would not do for our fellow men. We want to protect them. Yes, if you were to mitigate some of this by the, let's say the MRA actually did something apart from making videos and writing articles and actually change legislation, or, let's imagine that just for some unreal world where that happened, yeah, okay, things would be better. But I don't know, even if it would really help with the emotional biochemical fallout. The suicide rates for men would still be much higher than for women, because particularly after a failed relationship or marriage, because that's just what men do. They take it to heart a lot more. I mean, that's put it in very simplistic terms, but effectively that's what happens. Now, there are a lot of reasons, and I was thinking at some point in time making a video on this if I decide to continue making videos. There are reasons for this. Some I could just off the top of my head mention. Of course, women tend to have much more greater social access, which allows them to recover from relationships greater. They spend more time with their so-called friends. Men tend to wallow in isolation. Women also have far greater access to sex. Now, sex is probably the best way to recover from previous relationships, because you are eliminating the previous chemical bonds and newly establishing them with someone else. Oxytocin, all the pair bonding shit that goes on. That's of course a huge advantage to women, because they have much greater access to sex than do men. And part of it is, I just think, our constitution. I think physiologically speaking, neurologically speaking, it is of reproductive advantage to men to want to immolate themselves for the sake of women, because think of self-immolation, and you might remember that word since you are Mickeyshrugged. Think of self-immolation as another resource that men can offer women, apart from the physical resources of money or meat in a primitive setting. The desire to self-immolate is the desire to do everything you can for that woman and her offspring, your offspring. That's a positive in terms of gamete fertilization. In fact, I mean, we have to be aware that evolution doesn't care if men destroy themselves in the process. I mean, evolution doesn't care if certain species of arachnid males are consumed after copulation, or praying mantises. None of this doesn't matter. The important thing is you got the gametes fertilized. And so, yes, this is of an evolutionary advantage to men for the sake of reproduction, this self-immolation. And I think also what can only be described as this kind of a neurological, overwhelming devotion to the female, which females almost entirely lack with respects to men. That's of an advantage too, because that shows a willingness to offer perhaps the most valuable resource, your very life, for the sake of a female. Now, would this have been a reproductive advantage to a woman? Not really. Remember, the females in the animal kingdom, particularly amongst mammals and certainly amongst birds, I mean, look at peacocks, do the selecting. If you're doing the selecting, you have much less reason to evolve, or I'll say invest in this context, even though it's evolution and you're evolving, or rather to evolve attributes and qualities in you that would lend themselves to self-sacrifice for the sake of attracting a mate, because you are the one selecting the mate. They are chasing you. Such things might be a benefit for the sake of immediate offspring, which is why women will occasionally sacrifice, or perhaps even often, for their direct offspring. But male partners is very different. So that we're talking about different evolutionary lines and different mechanisms by which men and women operate. Men and women exist in reproductive opposition. They have different goals. They've evolved along different lines. The sexual dimorphism is quite pronounced, although not as pronounced in such species as, say, gorillas, for example, or particularly orangutans, where you have massive sexual dimorphism. And these are all indications that we evolved along different lines. It would not have been of a benefit to a woman to utterly devote herself to a man. Far greater benefit it would be to a woman, to a female, Homo sapiens, to utterly devote herself to her direct progeny, to her offspring. For a man, it would be of direct benefit to utterly devote himself to both the female and his direct offspring. But in particular, to offer himself and to self-immolate himself for the sake of a female, the ultimate resource, your very life, for hers. This seems to me probably in the greater scope of things, if in the telling of the evolutionary tale, apart from the minor constituents of that tale, for example, greater access to sex and greater access to social circles, why men suffer a lot more. It's been biologically, biochemically, evolutionarily programmed into them. Women don't have that issue because it was not of an evolutionary reproductive advantage to be utterly devoted to their partner, whereas it certainly was for men. Remember, the destruction of the self is irrelevant. The important thing is that you got those gametes fertilized and your DNA has been passed on. Now, so effectively, you spent a lot of time talking about pizza. I don't really know your natural desire this, natural desire that. I'm attracted to women too, but the legal implications for me are really secondary. I mean, they're there, but they don't. I try to look at the bigger picture. I try to be rational about this. I don't have an aching desire to interact with women. I think because I understand women. Now, that might sound arrogant, but I've spent now a lot of time trying to understand our species and our place in the biosphere. And I understand. I'm not going to attribute what you seem to do, near divine qualities, to women. I mean, your unflinching desire to be with them seems reflective of just that, to be perfectly honest. So I'm not entirely following you here. The whole natural thing, I explained this now ad nauseum, not a good argument. There are many, many destructive consequences for being in, potentially at least, destructive consequences for being in a relationship. Yes, you'll get off on your hormonal cocktail. I mean, the cocktail, even me, even as for speaking for me, let's say by some strange occurrence I were to start sipping the cocktail once again, I probably would feel this overwhelming power. It would be fighting with my sense of reason. It's unlikely to happen, but look, and this idea that I don't like women, I'm not really sure what that means. I'm sexually attracted to women. I can't remember ever having an interesting conversation with a female ever, apart occasionally from Girl Writes What, and every now and then in certain academic contexts, an odd conversation, but usually I no, can't remember a single conversation. And maybe it's just because my memory is shot. I don't know. But my interest in women is primarily sexual, physical attraction to them, which isn't really worth capitalizing on, I think. Because there you go. Because there's an argument for the legal stuff. I mean, if you could just fuck willy nilly and not worry about the consequences, okay, I'll grant you that. That would be legally helpful. But for me, I don't know. Even spending time talking about inane, shallow nonsense doesn't really interest me. Hence why I abstain from that. That's not to say I wouldn't in certain contexts. I'll tell you the context in which I would interact with women, and I have done. I'm someone who's avidly interested in foreign languages, so if there's a foreign female, I will interact with her because that aids me in my quest to acquire my foreign languages, but that's pretty much it. You see, I've tried to recondition myself to almost think like a female. Women view men as utilities, and they always will, and so I do the same. Women are useful potentially to me in the specific context as conduits for me to learn or acquire a foreign language and to improve my skills in that language, whatever that language might be at a given time. They are conduits. They are utilities, just as I am a potential utility to them. And ultimately, it does come down to commensurate recompense, as Bob Russell's talked about. It may or may not be commensurate in that context. And at the moment, I'm actually not interacting with females in this regard, but cost-benefit. Greater cost, less benefit. I mean, all these things, that's ultimately what it comes down to. I had actually an ex-wife and a relationship with me many years ago along those lines. I mean, she was the prototypical female and so honest. This is a translation, mind you. She said to me, you know, after all this time, I've done the cost-benefit analysis, and you're more cost to me than benefit. I'm literally translating out of the original language there. She was an honest female, retrospectively. She was a bit deranged. She had borderline personality syndrome as well, but nevertheless. My point that I've been making is that just natural is not synonymous with good. There are consequences, even without the legal and cultural stuff. There are serious consequences. Men can kill themselves without all of that stuff because we do have this male mother need. We have this destructive desire for self-immolation. It is very useful for the propagation of DNA. It is very useful for the purposes of gamete fertilization. It is very useful in an evolutionary sense. It's not very useful in a individual sense. It's not very useful outside of the unrelenting forces of nature. Yes, evolution. Because it prevents you from thinking critically. And I think that is the most important thing we can do, that is, thinking critically. And it prevents you from analyzing the situation, taking a step back, without being emotionally invested in it. And good Sir Mickeyshrugged, denizen of the desert, I think you have failed in trying to be objective. I think you have failed in trying to look at the greater context, which is, once again, 3.6 billion years, and essentially have allied yourself to your emotions and your desires and do not want to look at the greater context. This is not me being particularly pessimistic. I do think trying to change the laws is futile because this is so ingrained in us, so ingrained. Far, far better it would be for all of us, men and women, to be aware of our autopilot functions on an individual level through the process of critical thought, through the process of renunciation of the autopilot. Each thought one step at a time, far more beneficial to all of us as a species, as an individual person, as groups, to slowly develop an awareness, a sense of consciousness of the automaticity of our thought and actions, of our, unfortunately, you don't like me saying this, many of our predetermined biological drives and urges, which very often end in destruction for men, throwing themselves in front of bullets for foreign women, Reflexively, this wasn't particularly destructive, apart from the intellectual destruction of the young man picking up pieces of piles of paper for attractive TAs just because they're attractive female TAs. This is not rational in any context but the context of procreation and reproduction. Makes no sense otherwise. And if we want to divorce ourselves from that, for all the people who opine about me and Barbarossa as biological determinists, and I make no apologies for that, I am a biological determinist because that's the only rational view there is of things. That doesn't mean within the deterministic framework, as I mentioned in my original Autopilot video, that you don't have different variables. You do have different variables. A usually leads to B, but if you plug in certain other factors, it can maybe lead to C or D. That doesn't mean, because I, at least, I won't speak for Barbarossa, am a biological determinist, that there's not a possibility for modification of certain deterministic principles when engaging in critical thought. There arises the anomaly. There arises the possibility of changing things. However, it is a very, very hopeful wager, and I'm using hopeful in a very euphemistic sense, on the part of MRAs and others of their ilk to believe that society and the civilization, the society and the world at large, will somehow change their tune and turn off their autopilot function. They're not going to do it. It comes down to individuals, particularly individual men, such as you or me, to do so. This is for the longest time what you talk about different factions of MGTOW. This is what MGTOW is to me. It is engaging critical thought and looking at the world, the cosmos, if you will, and your place in it objectively, and trying to find your own place within that muck of confusion. And it's a muck of confusion because of, 3.6 billion years. This is not the way forward. This is simply pandering to your urges and just saying it's natural and saying it's good. Natural is synonymous with positive and good when everything around us is natural. Nicotine addiction is natural. This is not the way forward. It's not. I like women fine. I like fucking them. And occasionally, if they have a foreign language I want to learn, I will engage with them as well. But I have to say, I'll grant you, I've deconditioned myself from what you call an emotional and spiritual attraction to them. It is possible. I used to have it. I used to have an incredible male mother need. I, many, many, many winters ago, saw women as divine goddesses who were going to offer me succor and relief from the harshness of the world. I bet that's where you're at right now, which is probably being somewhat amplified by your location. It's not exactly the nicest place, Arizona, though it is better than California. I've deconditioned myself, and men can do that too. Maybe they don't want to. You see, over time, I originally made this video, Men Won't Change. I've come to the conclusion that, men won't change. Men, because of their autopilot function, do not want to kick in the critical thinking. They want to self-immolate. They don't, as long as they get their blowjobs and beer. I mentioned in my Escape Velocity video, men are carnal, simple creatures. That's fine. Now, to say that I'm not MGTOW because I don't share that view, that I don't share the blowjob and beer worldview of simply, let's fix the law so we get our blowjobs and beer, and put up with female shenanigans for that reason, or for the sake of those desirables, is a bit ludicrous. There are different kinds of MGTOW. There are different factions, if you will. There are many MGTOW, I suspect, are just MGTOW because of the legal stuff. I guess that's your camp. I belong to a different kind of MGTOW. Call it self-determination, call it self-critical thought. I still wouldn't get married if they fixed the laws. I mentioned this in an entire video. I'm not interested in it. I'm interested in exploring the world and humanity outside of the context of the automaticity that seems to plague virtually, everyone else on the planet, with a few exceptions. Even prize scientists, Nobel Prize winning scientists, actually, Famed scientists succumb to this sometimes, or very often even. There's this dichotomization of thought that occurs, and a dichotomization of how we interpret the world. Now, I am planning on a long-term, I'm going to be getting off soon here, a longish video, scripted video on some of the things I'd mentioned in greater detail. But I hope I've addressed some of, your arguments. I don't even know what you weren't really making an argument. You were just saying, I'm spiritually attracted to women, I'm emotionally attracted to women, I'm physically, and there's nothing wrong with it. Okay, fine. You and every other guy on the planet. I mean, self-immolate all you want. But let's try to be objective. Let's not pretend that natural is some sort of perfect synonym for good or positive or healthful or anything of that nature. You might enjoy the chemical cocktail while it lasts. It will end, and quite possibly, and quite very much outside of the legal framework of things and the cultural framework of things, that chemical cocktail can lead to your destruction. I actually know several men who have consigned themselves to oblivion because of that. There are consequences. There are consequences to everything natural or not natural. And I don't understand why you cackle and laugh so much. And I don't have a German accent. Anyway, I've said my piece for now. I hope that clarifies things for certain people. Until the next time, if there is such a time, may the gods be with you, fortune favor you, and make sure to maybe eat your potatoes. Bye-bye.